in order to stimulate the supply side. So our conversation with the panel will be about that. We're going to hear from financiers, from practitioners, from strategists, private sector, public sector, how we can move this. And what we envisaged with this was that we'll have a conversation. We don't want this to be a traditional panel. We're going to interrupt them. I encourage you to speak to one another. Please raise your hand, participate in this, because we want to come out of this session with some very concrete ideas of how we can shape the needle. So I will stop now and move to the moderation. I'll see you next week. All right, that's very good. So I now want to start with the camp chat because of like a very good starting point to talk about a company that generates electricity. But let me actually move to financiers. So I think we start with So Bijou, and I do not want to pronounce your last name because it's I don't know. Yeah, thank you. And so you work in Standard Chartered here in Kenya, and you are looking at corporate investment banking and trying to kind of be a little bit more inevitably strategic in the way that business is done in the banking sector. So now we said the renewables potential is huge, and but we still, I mean, there's only 2% of global renewables on this continent, so they're really not doing very well. So from your perspective as a banker, which risks are still hardest to resolve, and what risk-sharing ideas would you have to actually overcome some of the problems we have, or maybe partnerships or methodologies that would help us?
Thank you and good morning all. So just a quick introduction again, Virgis and Rashka Standard Chartered. For those who know us, great. If you don't, we're over 100 years old in Kenya, and a corporate investment bank, and obviously a full-service retail bank as well. But just let me just talk about a few truths. Two truths first. One is the countries or continents that are going to be impacted most by climate change are Asia, Africa, and to some extent some parts of the Middle East, and LATAM. Standard Chartered calls Asia, Africa, Middle East home. So we have no choice but to be a solution to the inevitable challenges of climate change that are going to impact not just our businesses but our societies and businesses as a whole. So that's kind of one. The second one on other truth is around renewables in Kenya. We proudly say we 93% renewable grid. But at the end of the day, it's a 3 gigawatt grid. It's tiny. When you compare it to some of our peer nations. We have to scale that massively, and there are plans that you've probably read the government plans around this. Now, coming to the question, sorry, before you cut me off. Before you it's scary sitting here. But yeah, so just coming to the traditional project finance for renewables is kind of well understood now. So you have at the top end, you have the de-risking of first loss tools, MEGA and the likes coming in to take first loss, which greatly reduces the gap between perceived risk and actual risk. Then you have credit risk insurance at your next level, and that's growing, and that's there's more appetite. People like TD are playing a very big role in that space. Then obviously you have the DFIs who come in and provide long-term capital. And then the last piece is really around currencies. Now, so that piece continues to be sort of the stock approach to doing renewables, and you talked about only 2% on the continent. I think some of the challenges we've seen kind of a few areas. One is the environmental and social risk assessments. There is a bit of a large challenge in the sense that there's a need to try and get some of these projects up and running quickly. So be they dams or hydro be it wind, etc. But what we're increasingly seeing is the quality of ESIAs isn't great. And this is not pointing a finger at anyone, but if you're going to do a hydro project, you kind of, as for those who are practitioners know, you need 18, 24 months of data, wet season, dry season, all that wonderful stuff around the ESIAs. There's a capacity build that needs to be done at the National Environmental Management Authority in Kenya, which I think is absolutely key. So one is the quality of the ESIAs. The second one is currency. Now, if you look at South Africa, it's all probably rand-based financing. Kenya still uses dollar. Our PPAs are dollar. And it creates the mismatch because receivables are shillings. We've traditionally been unable to hedge long-term shillings. But one big event that's happened is at the end of February, you may have seen the central bank introduced a new curve called Kesonia, which is based on the UK Sonian curve, which eventually will allow us to do create a two-way swap market that allows you to hedge long-term shillings. So that greatly de-risks the foreign currency side as well. So currency mismatch is a big one. ESI is the second one. And I guess that's kind of the two big ones. The last piece I want to talk about is carbon. Carbon finance, carbon has been up and down, topsy-turvy. You've read all the news on carbon. But we still are big believers in carbon finance. The challenge remains the carbon as an asset class from a capital efficiency perspective in banks isn't the greatest. I mean, it's an expensive, it's hard to recognize it as an asset class from a regulatory perspective. Well, we still think there is juice in the carbon markets to be able to finance some of the new projects. And we're plowing a huge amount of effort into the carbon finance space.
No, it's very good. But I will leave two questions for you for the next round, because the one thing is like, all the problems that you mentioned that are very real, but what can we do about it? And then you mentioned the Southeast Asia. They're moving much faster than the continent is moving. So maybe in the second round, you can actually reflect a little bit on what the difference is, because many of the situations are comparable. So I want to move to John Lugo, who is the Chief Operating Officer of African Mineral Developers. And one of the issues that we know about finance is also that the financing institutions are not very used to working with decentralized renewables in small scale, and so we go either utility scale, which is more familiar, or we go like a solar system, housing type of thing, which is kind of residential, does not really accumulate. So with the mini privatization which you have, it is kind of in between these two. What would be your advice how to actually move it to productive use and to actually have a great impact on industrial agenda?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. So again, my name is John Lugo, CEO at AMDA. AMDA is an organization that supports mini developers across Africa. We've got about 60 plus developers across Africa developing mini grid projects. To answer your question, I think for mini grids to evolve from small household scale systems, and they are doing that already, right? We're slowly evolving towards large scale and commercially oriented networks. There are, I think, four things. Right? Number one, scale and capacity. Right? I think where we're seated here, everybody's thinking in gigawatts and in thousands of megawatts, but I'm thinking in kilowatts and probably 100 plus a couple of megawatts, right? So scale and capacity. Moving beyond the 100 megawatts, 100 kilowatts that we're seeing for the household, customers, to the mega projects, probably small scale, 1 megawatt, 2 megawatt project, capable of powering mills, cold storage, processing plants, and stuff like that. Now, that requires, I think, stronger distribution in terms of infrastructure, higher voltage lines, which we, face of building. And then the next thing is reliability and quality. forward-lookingly in terms of, because this machinery, these agricultural machineries require stable voltage and frequency, and so mini grids must improve their standards in terms of being more reliable. And that is what we're doing. We work on the standards around that to make sure that all mini grids that have come up are standardized to support that reliability and quality. The third one is demand aggregation. When I talk about demand aggregation, I mean that we need policies that make mini grids able to deliver and aggregate and partner with county governments. For example, in Kenya, we talk about this county aggregation and industrial parks, and how do we partner with these counties for us to be able to scale and support the agro-industry activity that is coming up in these counties. That's another thing, and then that also creates an anchor load for the mini grids, which we don't have today. Household is not anchor load because it's not predictable, right? When we go towards the machinery and agro processing plants, we create anchor clients, and we are seeing that model coming up. In Morana, for example, Hydrobox, they developed the ABC model, the anchor business customer model, and they're shifting away from the household mini grids towards a more sustainable type of business that brings in predictable cash flow that my colleagues, the finances, the guys who with the money are looking for, right? And then the last one is financing and business models. I think we need to shift from this household-driven kind of funding with donor funding and grants, and go towards blended finance. I think you touched on it a little bit in terms of how we look at this. So we need to build more mini grids that are scalable, and so that we can attract also that private equity investment that comes into the sector.
Yeah, John, for the next round, you said we're talking gigawatts and you're talking gigawatts, and obviously it's a size, but it's also a mindset, because we are thinking in commodities, when you're gigawatts, you're thinking in services, like what is this for? And how do we reconcile this? Because with approach to service, you actually get the other system, you're looking what it does, you know you go public service, you go what you do, whatever it is. So how do we, and bigger complication as well is what does it mean for national budgets, who makes money, how it goes. So if you can actually give us a little bit of your thinking around this ecosystem when we're looking at the energy solution, but how we use this as an enabler rather than a driver in changing the landscape. So I see our colleague from Kengen came in. So I'll just pull you in so immediately, and I understand that you're replacing the colleague who was supposed to come. So I will ask you to introduce yourself, because I don't know what happened with my notes on that. But first of all, thank you very much for making the time and coming. We heard quite a bit about Kengen, and I was very impressed with your knowledge today. So that's very good. But one of the flagship projects that you have is the Naivasha Industrial Park, and it would be really interesting for us for this conversation to understand a little bit better how that worked. For the energy. Building the capacity to link industrial park, and what was the business model, what was the thinking, what made it complicated, what made it easy in moving this forward. So welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. First, let me apologize. We are quite late in the morning. That's when I was supposed to drive in to help people slightly. So my name is Anthony Nana from Kenya State Development Company. I work with the investment division. Yes, so then directly, what has been provided about Kenya. Kenya, we are the leading power generator in Kenya, we do almost 60% of the generation, and more than 90% is actually renewable. So we do both geothermal, hydro, a bit of wind. We are also moving into the solar space. Currently we are an O&M for government. We have 40 megawatts somewhere in Garissa. We operate the plant. And we have a bit of thermal, which is more of a peak plant. But government strategy is actually to exit the thermal plant, but we have a thermal plant in the western part of the country to stabilize the grid and also in Mombasa. So yes, around Naivasha, where we have our hydrothermal, which are average of around 800 megawatts. Kenya is the seventh leading producer of geothermal worldwide. In Africa, we actually lead in geothermal. So why did we go into the industrial park? We have actually very many new partners who are interested in actually operating, tapping into the renewable space. Most of the actually number of industry players approached us and actually showed their appetite. Because if you look at the grid, there is a bit of the dirty fuel, that is the thermal. So most people are actually interested in tapping into the renewable space. They want 100% renewable. So energy park will guarantee you 100% renewable energy. The beauty is we haven't faced very many challenges because we are owned by government, 70% government, 30% private. So we have been able to work closely with other government ministries, and we are part, until recently, we have been part and parcel of the Ministry of Energy. So we have been able to have our key partners in actually accelerating and supporting us in actually getting all the approvals to get the energy.
Thank you. And, in the next round, it's interesting to hear about your plans on solar. So is it utility solar, or you're looking at consolidating some of it decentralized?
So the next, actually we are looking across all the area of all the heat. We have solar in our Eastern Hydro. We are looking at bringing in 40 megawatts. Our geothermals, if you look at in Kenyan space, geothermals, nationally, we have only exploited almost 1 gigawatt. And we have a potential of 10 gigawatts, all the way from Turkana down to the south. And outside Kenya also, we have a number of countries that have also approached us. If you look at within Africa, we are actually working with Ethiopia, Djibouti. We are now working with Tanzania. We are working with Eswatini, which is known as Swaziland. We are also working with Namibia, Botswana. So, and also Mozambique. So if you look at it, in terms of output, internally, within Kenya, we are looking at adding 1,500 megawatts over the next 10 years. So there is an ambition within Kenya of adding 1,500, and part of that is coming through the geothermal. And also we have been awarded, I think the government is working on also giving us one of the hydro projects.
I'm calling James, I can't remember, I've known James for many, many years, and I still don't know how to pronounce his last name. But James is, first of all, he's a good friend, an extraordinary person, and we met when he was working for the president of Namibia, and was a brain behind the hydrogen strategy in Namibia, and he since went to the dark side and joined the private sector activities. And many of them are in the area that we're talking about, fertilizers, and where we actually see a huge opportunity for this conflict. So James, you work for a company that is a global company, works in different parts of the world. So do they have a chance?
First of all, it's really fantastic to be back in Kenya. I kind of grew up here a little bit back in the day. And welcome to the Elizabeth Press show. You can see all of us up here, very skewed to cross Elizabeth. I still have stripes in the back of my back for doing so, and I might do so today as well. We'll see how many more stripes I get. But it's important to have fun, right? We all work very hard. So indeed, I did transition, right, from public sector to private sector, and I actually did so very deliberately. A lot of people asked me to do very many different things, and I said no. So why did I do this? I joined a firm that actually is looking to and is willing to disrupt itself. And over time, we've come to learn that this is actually a very interesting thing for firms to do, otherwise the market will disrupt you. So what do I mean by that? ThyssenKrupp Group is probably one of the largest emitters in Europe. We operate one of the largest steel plants. We produce and still using coke and coal. We're big industrial players. We do automotive parts. We're a big cement builder, etc. However, within the group, we've also started marshalling our capability to build industrial clusters and chemical plants around the theme of decarbonized technology. So the segment is actually called decarbon technologies. There's 4 of them: electrolyzers, chemical plants for decarbonizing cement and others. And in the process, it puts me in a very interesting situation. As much as people know me for green hydrogen in Namibia, really at the core of it was green industrialization, right? And now I get to work for a firm that is looking to mobilize energy, capital, industrial policy to create solutions actually, interestingly, outside Europe. So increasingly we're looking to the East for supply chains, for best cost countries in terms of, by the way, we price engineering hours, so we get amazing return on investment from India, for example. And so the question is, and of course half of our clients come from the Middle East, especially for UDA, the company I work for, because we use a lot of their natural gas to make fertilizers. We built some of the world's largest fertilizer plants. So what's Africa's superpower? I thought Namibia had very interesting characteristics, lots of wind and solar and stuff like this. I knew Kenya had geothermal, but when I really landed and I started listening, I was absolutely blown away, right? And I suppose that's why my firm is hiring me. So what excites me about Kenya? The geothermal can deal with a lot about the intermediacy, right? So that's one. But yesterday I was the press secretary from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, from Dr. Mkwai or something like this, and he told me about all of the industrial policy interventions they put together to try and basically localize and create local content for the automotive sector. And my company does everything from making the chemical plants, but we also make some of the equipment. So we make hydrogen electrolyzers, right? etc. And I couldn't probably think of a better place to try to do that than Kenya, right? So the renewable energy is there. The labor force is dynamic, right? Everyone's very friendly, so it looks like I'm going to move here and buy a house or something like this. And at the same time, you've got access to the port, right? And so the general question for me is, why would ThyssenKrupp, for example, do business in Africa? What are the key ingredients, right, to succeed? And I actually think it's coordination of various ingredients, right? You don't make cake with flour or with sugar or with eggs, right? You need them all. So if we wanted to build competitive, dynamic industrial clusters in Africa, in Kenya, in East Africa, what do you need? You need essentially, in my humble opinion, a lot of industrial policy design. China is doing a fantastic job of this. India as well, the EU is trying. And I think this is what APRA, AGI are doing a fantastic job of, right? Which is electrons for electrons' sake gets us so far. But once you really want to crack into the $2-3 trillion economies, you then need to start being able to make things that are competitive here. So that industrial policy from the Ministry of Trade and Industry, amazing. AGI, amazing. But you also need capital. We build plants around the world, and I built a fertilizer plant in Qatar, and I'm trying to build one, for example, in Egypt, right? They're both MENA countries, but the one's cost of capital is 3 to 4%, and the other one is 8 to 7%. So resultantly, the fertilizer plant in Egypt will be more expensive than the Qatari one, and so will be the fertilizer, and so will diminish the competitiveness of that. So if you can deal with blended finance, bring in the commercial guys a little bit later, use strategic capital to de-risk the project, and by the way, what does that mean? A grant in Europe is not because they like you and because they're nice, wealthy people. It is because they're trying to create systemic demand for their goods, right? So when you know that, you know what you're asking for, why you're asking for it, and how to use it in a blended finance stack. But also, just because we, are not as wealthy as them, doesn't mean we have nothing to offer. When I was sitting in the PS's secretary in his office yesterday, we have put in place a plethora of amazing incentives. duty exemptions for your imported equipment, VAT exemptions, tax holidays. Guys, I've worked in African governments. It is not easy to get those, right? In Kenya, they're ready. And you put an amazing investment promotion agency to make it super easy. And so what do we need to win? It's not just cheap power or dynamic capital. It is a way to organize those ingredients to make an amazing wedding cake. Of course, you put a candle on it, you ask Elizabeth to then, kind of oversee the wedding ceremony, and then you should be able to have a really good time. I think that's a flavor of what we need.
Yeah, leaving the private sector just for free money.
Absolutely.
But James, I find it also very humorous that you took a cake analogy as if. So, but I want to actually pick up on your cake analogy. It's, you clearly X flour, I was on that way with this. But how do we figure out, on a regional level, who's very good and, using X, who's good and using, and how do you see that kind of aspect? Creating value chains and clusters that are going to close strategies, because frankly, Europe, when you think about Europe, they developed on oil on coal and steel. That was their magical power. And if we think about renewable energy, that can be equivalent of the trade of coal and steel. How do we actually make this work? So, the second round. The cake will come in second round. So I'm going to swap Sam and Hafsa because I want Sam to actually give us to kind of take us out of this kind of real life situation in a way. For Hafsa, it's very, very good to have you here. And James again, and you lead the bank's CIB operations. And you also have experience from other countries. And I was wondering, what gives you the confidence to invest in renewable energy projects and on this continent, but also not just around the projects, but what gives you confidence to look at the scaling up of your investments in the renewable energy space? And does it really make a difference to you if you have an offtake? Is that changing the calculation from a commercial perspective when you consider where to invest?
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. And once again, James again, I am the corporate investment bank business officer. If you know, I'm South African Barclays, an African bank. We build a big presence in the African continent with a vision to very impactful in the African continent. Africa is home for us. So from the perspective the question you asked is, we are very, very focused on renewable energy. I think the continent is not short of resources to generate renewable energy. And what we do is look at how we can scale this in a very, very massive way on the continent to make sure that the power that comes to is green, like from Kenya next door. And I think for us, we've been able to demonstrate that expertise, especially what apps was able to do in South Africa. And we're using that as a blueprint of scalability of renewable energy. You realize that in South Africa, because the Libyan crisis did help this become a reality, by March they already delivered 6,000 megawatts of renewable energy. And what they put in place was a very, very solid framework which provided a lot of predictability. Remember, power projects tend to be long-term, with a bit of patient capital, that the capital has to be invested. There's a lot of predictability, and therefore to your question, the framework that surrounds the provision of renewable energy then becomes very, very important. So if you look at what happened there was the renewable energy independent power purchasing arrangement that was put in place, and this is merely an auction process. And behind this, there was a lot of stability around the offtake, the procedures in place for the offtake to make sure that it is guaranteed and secure, and the investors are sure that the process of the power purchase agreements are actually in place. And I think that is one thing that the investors look for in a very, very big way. But most importantly, too, was the ability to allow price discovery. So through this process, we find because of the very solid framework which is put in place, which guaranteed and secured the offtake. So it's a very important component because people need something on offtake, made it very, very viable. Secondly, it made the regurgitation of capital possible because we spoke about it, the first most elements of construction and stability has landed. You find that there are a lot of off-takers ready to take advantage of the stream of predictable flows into the future and allow capital to then put out and reinvest it again for the higher risk takers to then go into new markets. So what we saw happening there was massive scalability. Once that certainty of off-take was there, the ability to bring huge amounts of scale came through and deliver 6,000 megawatts. Indeed, was quite a phenomenal thing that happened out of that market. And for that, and for us, that was really, really important in terms of giving the renewable asset that came into place. Is that scalable and replaceable across the continent? Absolutely. All you need to do is put that framework of certainty around the offtake and then make sure that the resources and ability of the players in the market to scale at large quantities are possible. And then we will get us across the continent. So as answer, probably nearly 60% of that financing around that capability, and that capability is available across the continent for us to replicate and ensure that the scalability of renewable energy is actually possible.
James, brilliant. But I remember now that Ambassador Ali said this morning in his speech of this kind of unfortunate dynamic where you cannot develop industry because you don't have power, and you cannot develop power because you don't have offtake. So how do we overcome that? Somebody has to pay for energy without having the offtake. Somebody needs to swallow it for 5 years or whatever to